Bill Coulson, and this is Jeannie Coulson, and she's really, from our family, done all the work. And so she's got a lot of materials that she's laid out on the back table that mostly pertain to the Stump Ranch since 1972 when we bought it. But it existed long before that, and we're very lucky to have today Art and Margaret Stump. Art is the grandson of the original Stumps in America, Thomas and Elizabeth Stump. And his father was Ed, who was the brother of Emil. And we knew the name of Emil and Mamie Stump. They were the children of Thomas and Elizabeth who stayed at the ranch all the years. So when we came to the ranch in 1972, knowing it as the Stump Ranch, it was Emil and Mamie that we knew, though we had never met them directly. But their only child was Teddy, who was the last in that branch of the Stump family, who died not too long before we bought the ranch, and we bought it at an estate sale. So we had to go to the county court to put in a bid on the ranch. We had it assessed when there was a bank in Boonville, if you recall. There was a branch of the Cloverdale Bank in Boonville, and they gave an assessment on the ranch, and we submitted that to the court, and we were very nervous because we thought everybody would want the Stump Ranch and nobody else did. So, well, there might have been somebody else, but they didn't outbid us. So we got the Stump Ranch, and this occasion is a delight for us because we get to find out more of the history, not only of the ranch itself, which is now 74 acres, but also of the neighborhood, which is called Keene Summit. When we bought and had boxes of books and other things shipped to the ranch, we sent them to general delivery, care of Keene Summit, in Comptche, California. We thought we were in Keene Summit, but actually, I guess maybe we are, but our post office is in Comptche.
You're a suburb of Comptche,
And Darlene is involved with the post office and makes sure that we get our mail. And every day, twice a day, everybody goes to the post office, first to send out their mail, and then afterward to come back and get their mail. And then they gather in the parking lot of the Comptche store, and until Dave Jacobson, the owner of the store, got a little tired of it, they'd all drink beer. But now, it was sort of cocktail hour in downtown Comptche, but there's no longer a cocktail hour, but it is the social center of the land of Comptche. I thought that what I might do is read you a little history of the ranch that our granddaughter, Isa, who was born in the house at the ranch in Comptche, who is now married and expecting her first child. When she was in second grade at the Comptche school, she interviewed the neighbors and wrote a little history of the Stump Ranch. And since Art and Margaret are here and know far more about it than we do, and Helen Williams is here, who is, you're related to the family.
I married Ben Stump.
You married Ben Stump, and Ben was one of Art's uncles? Uncles, okay.
Yeah.
So we have a lot of experts here, and we have Buddy Stenbeck and Darlene Cordero, who know a lot more about Comptche than we do. We're kind of interlopers, if you will. And most of the evidence that we've laid out pertains to our own family, but the more important story is the story of the Stumps themselves. So this is what Isa Falk, which is her married name, wrote about the ranch. This is the story This story is about the history of my land. Isa thinks it's hers. Her sister probably thinks it's hers too. And since we have 15 grandchildren, I'm sure each one of them thinks it's theirs as well. This story is about the history of my land. To find out more about it and the Stumps who lived here before, I interviewed Miriam, Esther, Sid, Ruth, and Sandy Newman. The Newmans have the bigger ranch just down the hill for us, and over the years I'm sure Isa also talked to the Mickey Smith family, which they're our biggest neighbors in Keene Summit. Right, Isa, the Stumps came to Comptche in the early 1900s, 1901. About the same time as the Newmans. In Finland, the Stumps' last name was Kantala. When they came to America, they changed their name to Stump because Kanto means stump in Finnish. Thomas Stump worked in the woods and on the county roads. Later, he became a saw filer. There were 8 Stump children and 8 Newmans. I think there were 9 Newmans. Do you know?
I think one died as an infant.
Do you remember how many Newmans?
No, not really.
A lot.
In any case, there were enough kids to make a school, and sooner or later they did. Right, see, it was called the Keene Summit School, and now it's the home of Polly and Grover Taylor. Polly is a Smith. She's Mickey Smith's sister. Quite soon after, the children from the logging camps joined the school. Then there were too many kids, so they started another school for a while, about 50 or 100 yards up the road next to our driveway. The Newmans came here in a ship. The youngest one got bored on the long journey, so he climbed the flagpost, and his mother was begging him to come down, writes Isa. The Stumps also came by ship from Finland. Then they rode from San Francisco to Albion in a lumber schooner. They came because there was lumber work. A little while after they got here, their land was logged. According to our information, that was in 1910. Would you say that's about right, Art? That it was first logged in 1910?
Yeah, I would imagine so. Yeah,
They had sold the timber rights to the Albion Lumber Company, which through many other ownerships has become Mendocino Redwood Company. But we'll tell you a little bit later about how we got involved in the timber business, because for a long time we were not allowed to cut our timber. And now we do have our rights back. Those were the rights that were sold to the Albion Lumber Company.
right.
They raised cattle and cows for milk and cream. They raised hay, potatoes, peas, beans, corn, tomatoes, bayo beans, and chickens. They shared a lot with their neighbors, and when they had extras, they sold them to the logging camps. At that time, potatoes were only 3 cents a pound, and when they sold 100-pound sacks, they always put 5 or 6 extra pounds in the sack. Some of the Stump boys paid for their college by picking huckleberries,
Right.
cleaning them, and selling huckleberries in San Francisco. Is that true, Art?
Walter, yeah.
Whenever there were 5 weeks in a month, the Finnish minister from Fort Bragg would come to Comptche to have services. He always stayed over at the Newmans because it was such a long trip from Fort Bragg. You know, with a horse and buggy, you had to stay overnight if you came to Comptche. The Newmans have pictures on their walls of our ranch and their ranch back in the olden days. All of the redwood trees on the hill have grown back. The old crooked tree in the sheep's field was there at the time and is still there now. And if you want to see the crooked tree, you just come to our place and we'll show you where it is. I brought a book that we did at one point about our adventures that began in Comptche, and I'm going to put this on the back table, but I marked a picture of the Newman Ranch taken from our ranch, And one of the more interesting things about it is this picture was taken 30 years ago, after we had the ranch for about 6 years. But the hill behind the Newman Ranch and across Flint Creek Road doesn't have many trees on it. And now if you come out there, you can't see the hill anymore. All you can see is trees. The first time we got interested in logging, once we'd gotten our timber rights back from the timber company, we were worried that it would make a big mess if you cut the trees and cut off the branches and make a lot of slash. And they said, don't worry about it, in 3 years it'll look like nothing happened. And I don't know if it takes that little a time to do that, but when you look at the Newman Ranch in this book, you see that it certainly has produced its share of second and third growth trees.
Well, Buddy can probably verify this, but Mickey Smith told us that in the 40s you'd go from Comptche to Mendocino and it was all pasture land and, sheep and cattle. And now you don't see any pasture land except maybe Larry Dunsley's place is the only place.
Our place was about half pasture when we bought it, because I guess the Stumps ran cattle and sheep. But since we got rid of the sheep, we had sheep for a while, but we didn't know what to do with them. So we sold them. And since then, the forest has been advancing on the house. And one of these days, we won't be able to get out the front door because we'll be living in the middle of the forest, because all the fir trees are reproducing themselves and coming down the hill toward us. So the pastures are disappearing. But I guess, like Mickey said, in the old days, the trees had not much value, huh?
No, and, pardon?
Second growth didn't have any value to it, and for years, all the farmers burnt their certain section of their land. That was a thing that was done every fall. Everybody would have big fires to keep that redwood brush down. And finally, it got to the point where the value of farming wasn't that much anymore, and it was such a nuisance of trying to keep those redwood trees down that they quit doing it, and then the trees started growing back, and that's what you see now.
I confess that when we bought the ranch, we thought the name the Stump Ranch referred to the fact that there were big stumps out there, and they were like sculpture. They were burned out, and they'd been unable to burn them completely out. And one of the things that we got with the ranch, because it came pretty well furnished with a tractor and a couple of a pickup truck and a car, we got a lot of two-man saws. So one of our teenage boys and I thought, oh, we'll go out there and we'll cut down these stumps and we won't have to look at them anymore. And after about 20 minutes of going like that and not making a dent in the first stump, we decided that we would think of them as modern sculpture.
Another story that Mickey told us was that when Jennifer, his daughter, went to school in Mendocino, the teacher said, oh, in the old days, the way they got a lot of these trees around here was when they cut one down, they'd plant 7 around where the old one was. And Mickey, of course, when Jennifer came home and told her dad, he laughed. He said, you never had to plant trees. He said they would just grow up from the roots of all these redwoods.
Well, Jeannie, what do you have to tell about?
Well, I have to get my notes. Oh, one of the reasons, why did we buy in Comptche? Bill and I had taken a vacation and we stayed at the Elk Cove Inn, which you all know is very primitive at the time, just an old farmhouse. And Roger Noteware and his wife were the proprietors, and we were kind of looking for a place as a second home, and we asked Roger about it, and I think he had looked at the fog it was a very bad year for rain and fog on the coast, and he said, well, if I were looking, I would look in Comptche. And we said, oh, where's Comptche? So that's how we went over to Comptche and liked it, and met Elsa Thompson, who told us about the Stump Ranch. She said the owner there has just died, and it'll probably be an estate sale, so that's how we happened to buy that. So
Jeannie, one of the things that the Stumps, Margaret and Art told me that I wasn't aware of, that was that before Teddy died, he was afflicted with a severe case of diabetes, and it affected his mind somewhat. And Charlie Kantala, who is since deceased, but Charlie said he would call on Teddy, and he'd find Teddy sitting by the wood stove in the kitchen, throwing paper money into the stove, burning it up. And Art, what was the explanation for that? That Teddy didn't want anybody to have it, or?
As far as I know, I wasn't that familiar with Teddy, because after he got sick there, he didn't want anybody to get anything left. I mean, like the old Victrola I used to play all the time, I threw everything down the well. And
So the well is filled with things like old Victrolas.
And furniture and dishes.
God only knows what's down there.
Yeah, things that were in the house, that was what we were told.
And he also burned a couple of automobiles, an old Bug, VW Bug, and an old truck they're still up on the top of our hill, but they're pretty well decrepit now.
Buddy, did you know Teddy pretty well?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I do.
Quite well.
I never got to know him.
And was he a little bit off toward the end, or
Well,
not?
toward the end he was, yeah.
Yeah.
But, we went to grammar school together, so, I knew him well. But then apparently that diabetes got him so bad that, he wasn't in his right mind with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he never took care of it. Or did he?
Yeah, and then in those days, I guess they didn't really have that care that they have now.
No, that's right.
Well, Jeannie, what do you have?
Oh, well, just about when we came, we were kind of looking like hippies ourselves, and we had very long-haired boys, and we were told that it'd take about 20 years before you were accepted into the community, and it was about that.
I was going to say, we've been there 36 years and we're still not accepted.
But our close neighbors are very kind, the Smiths and the Newmans, and when we first came up to look at the ranch, we had just heard about it, so we drove up with our hippie friends, Ralph and Mary O'Kies, and about 10 minutes later, after we'd walked around a bit, here comes a pickup truck up the hill with Miriam and Bill Newman in it, with a big shotgun in the back window.
We carried him.
Asking us to please leave.
He said we were scaring the sheep.
And in the early days, one of the families, the Parker family, had movies at the old tavern. And we would take the kids, everybody in Comptche that wanted to go would take the kids to watch the old movies. It was kind of like, free night at the movies. And eventually, I think the tavern where the movies were held, is that right?
Yeah.
Where they had an episode of hepatitis, so they had to close that down. And then our children the younger children went for maybe 6 months to the old Comptche school when we stayed there a year. And it was earthquake condemned, so they retrofitted a barn, I think, where another tavern was.
The Blue Rose, yeah.
And now it's the Comptche school. It's a beautiful school. It's 2 stories, and they have children up to the 3rd grade. And a good teacher, Judy Stavely, good assistant, Danny Moyer. But a lot of old rock stars and hippies kind of moved into the community for a while, and the Coolidges moved in, and that's Rita Coolidge, if you know her. She's a rather famous singer. And her parents, her father was the minister of the Baptist church. And when they moved in, we heard that when somebody was building a house, that Reverend Coolidge would go up and pick up a hammer, and pretty soon that guy would be going to church with him and building the church. And then his son-in-law at the time was Chris Christopherson, another movie star. And it's alleged too that he helped build that church with the donations that he gave. So it's a very popular spot now for a lot of people from the coast come over to the Little Baptist Church, and they open it up for community meetings and anything. They always have church in the morning and then a potluck after. a lot of fun.
And every Christmas, the whole community gathers for a Christmas Carol sing-along. It used to be held in what used to be called the Grange Hall and is now called the Community Hall. But then they moved it to the church maybe 15 years ago. And our family helps provide what we call the Comptche Philharmonic Orchestra, because we're a musical family. When we moved to the ranch and didn't know anything about sheep or cattle, we decided we'd become a band, a family band. And so now every year we provide some of the music for the Comptche Christmas Carol sing-along, and a lot of the neighbors have joined the band, and George Hollister and his son played trumpet with us a couple of years ago. So if you ever want to see the Comptche Philharmonic, you watch for the announcement about Christmas time.
And then Cindy Hollister was another story in Comptche. She had been married, and she and her husband were in a very, very bad accident, and her husband died, and later she met George, or maybe before even, when they were still married, she had met George, but George and she were married, and had 2 sons, and we have a grange there that a lot of people belonged to in the old days, and Cindy found out that the grange originally had been given to the town, or was owned by the town itself, not the grange. And so she somehow went to court and got it back, and so it's a community property now. It's not owned by the Grange. And gradually she's been getting volunteers to fix that up, and people come down to paint, to put roof on, to do everything. But it's about, I would say, what, a third finished now?
Darlene, you've been involved in a lot of that.
Very much.
Yeah.
She's done a lot of work on it.
It's about, you're right, it's about a third. We're still working on pieces of the roof.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah, the kitchen has to be redone.
Right,
et
it's
cetera.
a 1913 building, so like everything 1913 is starting to fall apart.
Right.
Every 4th of July, no, Father's Day weekend, the fire department puts on a big chicken dinner. And a couple of years ago, we were at the chicken dinner, and a couple from the coast had come out, and it was their first trip to Comptche. And the man said to me, "What do people do in Comptche?" And I said, "Well, they're hiding out from the authorities." But it's not true. Only some of us are hiding out from the authorities.
It's a long, windy road.
Yeah, I have a friend who says it's easier to get to heaven than it is to get to Comptche.
Boulevard go in and out of there now, though.
You should have seen the old road.
I bet.
You should have seen the old road.
Get together out to Comptche, right? Dad fire up the go. What do we have then? No Chevrolet touring car. I don't know how many flat tires we had to fix before we got there.
Really?
I bet.
Oh, they had more darn spare tires there on that car.
Well, did you have to go down to the Navarro River and come along there, or was there a Comptche-Ukiah road?
We came right from Mendocino here, across.
So the present route of
Yeah.
the road,
Mm-hmm.
but the road was not paved in those days?
No.
Yeah, when was the road paved? When did
About 1955. It took
Long after we were married, I know.
That's the first paving was 1955.
And there used to be a railroad from Comptche into town. I guess they would take the
Right,
logs
went
in,
down.
and often people
Two
would,
Smiths there.
yeah, right.
Hear that, or a train come through there.
Yeah.
They blow the whistle, you can just hear it just for miles from up there on the hill there.
Oh, yeah, I guess they'd hop on the train and go into town, and Miriam Newman told us that when she would do that, she'd have to stay in town, because it was an all-day trip to get into town, and she'd
I've
stay
got some
overnight.
pictures of the train.
Do you? Oh, my goodness, back here on the table?
On the album.
Great.
With Walters, yes.
Okay.
I have a question. What was the route of the railroad?
What was that again?
How did the railroad get to Mendocino? What was the route?
It didn't, it went down to Albion. It followed the Albion route.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Ah,
Wonder how they did that.
One of the things we learned being city people coming to Comptche was how generous neighbors are. For example, when we were adding on to the house, not the original homestead house, but the house that Mamie and Teddy lived in, which was built in the 1950s by 60s by Norm Koski, who is the father of our son-in-law Willie Koski. But Norm built the house, and we added a two-story wing to it, and the cement truck coming up the driveway got stuck in the ditch, fully loaded. And all we had to pull it out with was our Chrysler station wagon, which didn't exactly work. So up comes Norm Shandell in, it was either his loader or his skidder, and he pulled the cement truck out of the ditch for us, and then Mickey Smith showed up with a wheelbarrow, and several other neighbors showed up, and everybody offloaded all this wet cement so it wouldn't dry in the truck, and we got our house built. And another time, we were hauling a travel trailer up onto the ranch. Our youngest daughter was getting married, and her new father-in-law and her husband were coming for a bachelor party in our travel trailer, but it almost didn't get there because the guy we hired from Santa Rosa, where we bought the trailer, to pull it up to the ranch for us, abandoned it at the base of the driveway. It was too steep for his taste. And so, again, not knowing what we were going to do, suddenly Mickey Smith shows up with another skidder and pulls the trailer up to the house. And that's the way Comptche is. I mean, people are really generous.
That's what the neighbors, I mean, help one another for years to get to it, get anything to do. That was our recreation too, to help one another. You know?
Yeah.
Another thing that you often go to the post office and you'll find flower bulbs and little clothing sitting on the front deck, and books. I mean, I've gotten a lot of good reading books, Bill and I have, on the front porch of the post office. And thank God the postmistress doesn't throw them away before we get there.
They say that in the summertime, if you park in front of the post office, you don't want to leave the windows on your car open, because when you come out, you'll find it full of squash.
Another nice thing about Comptche is the volunteer fire department, which Larry Tunzi, who lives on the top of the hill in what we call Melbourne, a little community between Mendocino and Comptche, he has been the fire chief for years and years, and is a wonderful fire chief. But he's collected all kinds of people to be in the fire department. And when we had an earthquake a few years ago, not a big one, but I think it was a 4-pointer or so, and the next day or so, the fire department went to every house in our community just to make sure everybody was okay and had enough food and water and didn't have damage to their house. So.
Before we had TV, the Coolidges knew we were interested in watching the Olympics. I forget what year that was, sometime in the 80s, was it? And we were particularly interested in the figure skating. And so they invited us over to their house because they had a satellite dish, and were able to watch Tanya Harding and Nancy Kerrigan at the Olympics that year. When our daughter Nancy got married, we had the reception at the ranch. She and her husband Thomas Partka were married in St. Anthony's here in Mendocino, but the reception was at the ranch. And Larry and, oh dear, what's Larry's wife's name? McDonald. Oh,
Judy.
Judy. Larry, I'm getting to that age. Larry and Judy McDonald and Joel and Pam Holmes showed up to barbecue all the chicken and steak for us. Again, volunteered to do that. That's Comptche for you.
So maybe we could open it for questions, or
Sure.
maybe Margaret and Art have something else you wanted to comment on?
Well, this was such short notice that it was hard to get things together, but I just, gathered up the things that we got from Art's family and pictures that we had saved. And I have the original family tree, and it's in Finnish, and anybody that can read Finn, but it goes back to 1765. It shows the descendants, and it shows Elizabeth and Thomas, each of their families, and also Ada, born in Finland. But I brought that. It's a copy of the family tree.
And another, she has a photograph album in the back of the room that has pictures of the Comptche fire, which was a big thing in 1932, did you say, Dee? But it was about in 32?
32.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know.
But
I didn't come into the family till 46, so-
Okay.
or a little before.
Well, it covered a lot of Comptche, not everything, but quite a bit of it.
Yes. Well, it was Walter's albums, and he was a great picture taker, so he has a lot of pictures. And I have tried to follow through with running down the family and their descendants, each of the Stump children. I've kind of let down a little, but I'm going to work on it now.
Very good.
But I certainly appreciate this opportunity to share with you.
Well, we hope you'll come to the ranch and see it, yeah.
Art would love to see it, because
Yeah.
he has so many memories, as a child.
If anybody would like to come out.
And I
I'd love
knew,
to show them.
since I married Art in 46, I knew all of the Stump children. Ada was the one that came from Finland, and she lived with Art's mother and dad for a while, and I got to know her, which was wonderful. She would relate things in Finn, and Art's mother would translate for me, and then she'd talk in English for a while, but she was a wonderful woman, and she was the oldest, the daughter, the first child. So it's been a wonderful experience.
It's still a Finnish neighborhood, Keene Summit. And I guess a lot of Comptche is Finnish. Are you both Finnish? Yeah. Yeah.
Does anyone translate Finn, the writing?
Our cousin does. Our cousin Elsa would be the best. If we could get a copy of your copy, we could ask her to translate.
I have so many letters and information that Walter received, and things from Finland. Elizabeth,
My wife's mother does too.
does she?
Yeah, she's still in communication with the farm in Finland,
Oh my goodness.
Yeah,
They came
because
from
Elizabeth's
Rusty
brother
central Finland.
wrote several letters.
My wife's, let's see, her grandparents came from Finland about the same time the Stumps did. And they didn't come because it was logging. They ended up in New York Mills, Minnesota. They came because he was being drafted into the Russian army.
Oh.
A lot of Finns left the army at that time. They were draft dodgers. They didn't want to serve
Oh, there
Russia.
was something mentioned about that in the letter.
That's how everybody ended up in Minnesota.
I have something mentioned about that, about Thomas.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah, about the Soviet Union, but I can't make it out. Some of the letters are part in English and some
Should
are,
have brought her mother here.
But we are hoping that our cousin who does translating will be here with us next month when we do this talk. And so we always give her things to translate because even though we speak Finnish, we learn that conversational,
But not reading.
but the reading and the writing is a different thing.
Yeah.
well, that's it, Art spoke Finn.
I used to speak it real well, but I've been away from it for so many years that I can't get my tongue working right.
See, both sides of
I can
Art's
understand
family are
how
from
to get it,
Finland.
but I'm trying to.
So I have both family
Oh,
histories.
wonderful.
And sometimes I'm in a time warp when I go back on dates and things. I get a little confused.
Yeah, we lived next to my grandmother, the rivers down there when I first got out of service, and
And they were, but they were Luomas that came from Finland, and they changed their name to Rivers. So a lot of them Americanized their names.
Right.
She couldn't believe the different names that they're all related.
Well, these two brothers lived side by side with different last names, and I was afraid to ask.
We heard that sometimes when people would arrive at Ellis Island with a foreign name that Americans couldn't pronounce, they would arbitrarily give them a name there. We heard the story, and I don't know if it's true or not, but that's how the Newman family got named, because he was the new man. And so they said, "You'll be Newman." Is that, do you know anything about that, buddy? Is that?
That's what I heard too.
Well, actually, what I heard was that it wasn't done at Ellis Island, that it was actually done at the lumber camp, because they couldn't pronounce his name, and they called him the new man.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, and some of the old time books that I have, they show that, where they gave them like a nickname for their last name.
Another interesting thing is that on the Newman property, there's one small cottage that Jimmy Newman, one of the grandson nephews of this family, has renovated, is an old logging cabin, and they have, I think they've put a bathroom in it and a bedroom, and they stay there when he and his wife stay there when they
That's
come.
on right on
But-
the road there.
But you probably wouldn't see too many of those old logging cabins
They were
around.
on skids, and they moved them
Yeah,
from one
they moved
camp to the other.
Right, right.
Yeah,
But it's still, I mean, it still looks like it's perfectly formed. It was, it's
they were well built, I guess, because they got moved, you know, they got hauled by
Right.
either oxen or,
uh-huh.
I don't think maybe horses moved them, but the oxen usually moved them in the logging camps.
We were back in Arizona, where I was at the university working in the 1970s, when we got a call from the Newman family saying that our timber rights might be available to us. When we bought the ranch, the deed indicated that all of the timber, as they said, lying, standing, or being on the property in 1910 belonged to the Albion Lumber Company and not to us, because the Stump family had sold the timber rights at that time. And the Newmans told us that they had done the same thing. They also did not own their own timber, which was a surprise to Gary Newman. The surviving members of the Newman family are Gary and Jimmy, the sons of Ruth and Sandy Newman, now deceased. But Gary didn't realize that they didn't have their timber rights until the 1970s. And one sign of the generosity of the neighbors was that we got this call saying that Masonite was going to be going out of business and transitioning through a new company called Timber Realization, and then to become Louisiana Pacific. So they said, we've been able to obtain our timber rights that were sold back in 1910, and you may be able to do that too. And they said to contact Jack Sweely, who worked for Masonite. Now Jack and Margaret wanted very much to be here today because they have a real affection for the neighbors of the Keene Summit, but they had to be out of town. But what Jack did was went to work with the attorneys for Timber Realization. And the story that emerged was that the Newmans had sold their timber rights as the Stumps did, but only for the timber lying, standing, or being on the property in 1910. And that timber was since taken. There was no more timber that the Albion Lumber Company owned. So the logic of it was that the company had used up its rights and that they ought to revert to the Newman family. Well, the Newmans, Jack says, had to go to court to establish their right to their own timber, and they got it back. And the only expense involved with that was the expense of the attorney who pled their case before the Superior Court. In our case, however, Louisiana Masonite had been paying what they called property tax, personal property tax on our timber for several years. Now you don't pay that tax anymore, you only pay tax on timber that you cut. But at the time, you paid tax on timber that you owned. And so the thing that Jack worked out was that if we would reimburse the company for the taxes that they had paid on our timber, as it happens, not their timber, but ours, that we would have clear ownership of our timber. They would quit claim the timber back to us, and that's what happened. We got our timber back, and all because of Jack Swaley and the Newman family intervening for us. We also had a call when we were in Arizona from the sheriff of Mendocino County that some kids had broken into the ranch. We had the gate chained at the time, and they had taken a bolt cutter and cut the chain, and apparently somehow knew that there was an old Model B sedan up on the ridge that Teddy had parked up there.
Had not been burned.
And had not been burned. It was in pretty good condition. And so they stole it. They pushed it down the hill, loaded it on a truck down on Flint Creek Road at 3 in the morning, and hauled the Model B Ford to Fort Bragg, where they were going to fix it up and sell it. And the Newmans saw them take it. I don't know what they were doing with their binoculars at 3 in the morning, but they called the sheriff.
It was a moonlit night. And they said it
Moonlit
was,
night, yeah. So the sheriff said, "Do you want your Model B Ford back?" Well, I no more knew what to do with a Model B Ford than I knew what to do with sheep. So I said, and he said, "You'll have to come and get it." Well, we were in Phoenix at the time. And I said, "Well, what are the alternatives?" And he said, "Well, you could donate it to the Fort Bragg High School because they have an auto shop, and they'll restore the Model B Ford and sell it, and to the benefit of the school district." So that's how it worked out. But we don't have our Model B Ford anymore, but we don't know what's happened to it. But anyway, that was, again, another generous deed on the part of the Newmans and the sheriff.
Yeah, most of
I
it.
guess, yeah.
Whoever now has it would love to know that story.
Yeah.
Was the Model B the one that has the rumble seat?
No, that one didn't have, that was the Model A, had the rumble seat. Yeah, this was a sedan, a 4-door vehicle. I should mention too that an interesting survey that was done a couple of years ago, Darlene, you might know about this. They surveyed the kids in the Comptche school, and they found that a very large percentage of them, their parents had gone to the Comptche school. What was it, something like 50% or more?
I think so, but I think that was 12 kids and.
12 kids.
It was 12 for it, yeah.
Yeah.
It's Chandels, I think Renee and Panna are 7th generation. Alex, Buddy's grandson, is 5th generation.
I think.
Yeah, because we all went to Comptche
Yeah.
school.
Sure.
Didn't
And
the
our
Smith
mothers
kids?
went.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The Smith kids.
Were the Mitchells among them?
All right.
Which Mitchells?
Ellen Mitchell?
They did go there then, but I don't think they were considered descendants from Comptche.
No.
Because they came out of Fort Bragg
Right.
originally, yeah. So the old families, I think there were 2 that still had families that still had kids in the school.
How about the Ottisons? Were they?
Yeah, they would have been, but Sally's in Fort Bragg, so her children don't go to that school. Because that's where the school is, the old Ottison Barn.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, well, my cousin's married to an Addison.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And
Marge Ottison.
Marge.
Fred Ottison.
Okay.
Margie,
yeah,
yeah.
that's
Yeah, that's
Sally's
Art's cousin.
parents.
On the river side of the family, yeah.
Right, okay.
yeah.
Well, which Miss Mitchell were you asking about?
Well, Alan and Ann.
They built a home there.
Oh, Ellen and Ann Mitchell. Oh,
Yeah.
that was Mitchell.
Their
Wasn't
second
there
cousin.
another Mitchell family, Donnie Mitchell, or
I don't know who the parents were.
They're related.
are they related?
Yeah, there are a lot of
Ronnie and-
Mitchells.
Okay.
I think,
Cousins.
cousins.
I don't know if you remember back in 1972, the first year we were there, there was a couple in town. He was a college professor from the Bay Area, as I recall, and he was on sabbatical. And his wife was a skilled pianist, and she began to teach the children of Comptche to play the piano. And one day she drove up our driveway in her sports car and asked if we knew the situation at the Comptche school. She said they had found that 65% of the children of the Comptche school had never been outside of Mendocino County. And they wanted to have a fundraiser so that they could send the children and their chaperones to San Francisco so we would finally not seem so backward in Comptche. And they said that they decided that to raise money they would have a talent show, and that in order to encourage maximum participation, all the landowners of Comptche would be required to contribute some kind of performance to the talent show. Well, Mr. Mitchell dressed up like Superman and got a squirt gun, and his talent was to run through the audience and squirt people. And
Not the same Mitchell, maybe.
maybe not the Mitchell you knew. And Mrs. Evans, the Evanses still live there, her talent was to do a dramatic reading from Kipling. And we were required to contribute some kind of talent, but we had none. So we started a family band, and we performed, we played what we thought was Tin Roof Blues, but which I had remembered because I had a Dixieland band in college. But it wasn't Tin Roof Blues at all. It was something else that nobody ever heard of before and has not been heard of since. But we got a standing ovation because people felt sorry for us. And we so much enjoyed the applause, or at least the father of the family did, that when we got back to San Diego after our first year in Comptche, we kept the family band going. And I don't know if you remember a program on television called The Gong Show. And we auditioned for The Gong Show, and we got on The Gong Show.
Was that Major Bose? Major Bose hour?
No, it wasn't Major Bose.
No, it was The Gong Show. It was a program where you had to fear performing badly because they would gong you. And I'm happy to say we didn't get gonged. And we didn't exactly win either, but we did get
They got there.
we did get 25 pounds of wallpaper paste for a prize. And
What everybody needs.
Right.
And it turns out that 25 pounds of wallpaper paste goes an awfully long way. So if any of you are into redecorating, let us know.
That's real neighborly of you.
Yeah.
So where is your property located? I'm sure everybody else knows, but I don't know exactly.
Well, if you come out, if you can find your way through the landslide at the top of the hill, and come out to Comptche and go to the post office, immediately past the post office is Flynn Creek Road. So you turn right there and you go about 3.5 miles. And the Newman Ranch has a big old palm tree in the front, about 3.5 miles south of the post office. We're the next driveway. There's a mile marker there, 5.27. So our driveway is at the 5.27 mile marker. So we're 5.27 miles from Highway 128 and about 3.5 miles from downtown Comptche. So we're serious in saying if any of you, if you want to come out and see the ranch, and if you want to bring your two-man song, we'll have a go at those stumps. But we'd be delighted to have you. Just give us a call. We're in the phone book, and we really would be pleased to show you around the place. In a way, it's true we don't own it, because I mean, it's the Stump Ranch is what it is, and it still is the Stump Ranch, and nobody thinks of it as the Coulson Ranch. Everybody knows that it's the Stump Ranch, so please come out and see it.
Is it
Sweet.
a bigger parcel now or a smaller parcel than original?
Well, originally, now, and if you look in Elsa Thompson's book, The History of Comptche, she says that 80 acres were sold by the Stumps to the Hendrickson family, which then later sold it to the Newmans. That's not the story that we got. What we heard was that they had 80 acres to begin with. On 2 quarter sections is what the ranch was originally. Now it's only 74 acres, not 80, because the Hendricksons built their house by mistake on the Stump property and at the north end.
They didn't.
So the Stumps sold 6 acres to the Hendricksons. That's the story that we got, and that's the reason we're told that we're only 74 acres. We have 34 acres of improved property where the house and the barn and so forth is, and then we have 40 acres of forest and some meadow running down to and past what we call the Masonite Road. So, Buddy, what's the story that you've heard? Have you heard that originally it was 160 or was it 80 acres?
I really don't know.
You don't know? Yeah.
Our daughter lives in the old homestead now with her 3 children, so that's been very nice for us to have family right next door.
Oh, that is.
There's a picture back there of, on the table of 3 of our grandsons swinging on an old apple tree. We had some ropes hanging from the tree for kids to swing on. And you'll see the back end of the Stump house, which is where Monica now lives, though it's been somewhat improved since then.
Yeah, for a while it was a garage. Teddy parked his truck in it, I think. And then we used it as a bunkhouse when we first moved to the little house, and it only had 2 bedrooms, 1 bath. So we put our 3 sons down in the sauna, which we never used as a sauna, now as a storage room. We put the 2 older daughters in the old house, in the homestead house, which was had a few bats in it at the time, and we stayed in the good house. That was 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, and that old house that was subsequently a barn, and a garage, is where Monica lives now, and then we live in the other house.
Is the barn still there?
Oh yes,
yeah.
The barn is in very good condition. We have a basketball court, well, half basketball court in it. It was what our 3 grandkids use for playing basketball in the rainy season. And another section, we haven't put it up yet, but we're going to. A tennis, we're going to have table tennis. Yeah.
But the east portion of the barn was starting to sink, and so last year, Larry McDonald, who is an excellent contractor, raised the east portion of the barn, jacked it up, and poured a new cement foundation. So now the barn is probably good for another 200 years. But it's an excellent barn. Art, you were saying they built those things with good wood at that time.
Well, that's for sure. I mean, it was milled right there probably.
Right.
And
Yeah, you can see the hand-hewn beams if you look up on,
There's also a very nice wood shed. One of our sons-in-law built a tool shed. There's the old sauna house, which we now use for storage. But it had everything that we would want. And it even had sheep, which we didn't.
I didn't know what to do.
that driveway up to the house, so that sure peeved a lot of people off. Their little cars, they'd stall in the middle of it, and then they'd go back. And it always had big springs in it.
Right,
Yeah.
well, we have springs all over. In fact, we have 1 horse left, and we used to have a couple of ponies, but I will go out in the pasture where the horse runs around, and I'll look down a hole at least that deep and see a little trickle of water coming through, because there are springs there. The horse seems to know how to avoid them, but it's remarkable. And every now and then we find a new spring, particularly in the rainy weather, it'll be spurting up out of the ground.
I know that driveway always had springs in it, though. They'd bog down into the little cars, and
What we did, we put in a series of water bars to keep the water from flowing straight down. So now the driveway holds up pretty good, is well rocked, but it is a little bumpy because you gotta go over all the water bars to get up to the place.
Yeah, I remember kids, like, sitting in an old touring car in the back seat, and Dad really wind that thing up to get up there. So, yeah, that was quite a trip out there then.
I have a question, Art. Is it true that your uncles or aunts were born in some of the Thai camps in the area? Millie especially, say,
Who was it?
I don't,
you don't remember that?
No, I
I
heard
don't remember anyone
some,
mentioning it, but
I remember somebody talking about it, but I don't know who it was, or,
Right.
yeah, maybe we'll run across it in the things that we haven't opened up yet.
yeah, one was born in Albion.
Might have been in the camp, huh?
Yeah, and that was probably at a camp because there was mention of them going to Wendling. Thomas Stump worked at Wendling, and can't think of the other. I have some of the old postcards with the postmarks from, they used to have, the post office was on skids too, and it would go to the camp, and they had their own postmark. And then when they go to a new show or a new camp, they'd take the post office and it would be a different name. So that's, I found that out from Walter.
You know, a lot of postcards we have, a whole album full of them,
Yeah.
different postmarks on these.
I have several from Glen Blair, from the camp out there, the logging camp. So I know some of them are priceless now, and I really treasure them. But different members of the family, and they would send a postcard from Comptche into Fort Bragg, no postage. They just put the person's name on it.
Oh, really?
And I guess they took it to the post office and they delivered to Fort Bragg, and there was no postage.
Huh,
Oh my goodness.
can't get away with that anymore.
Get the mail and Comptche to come.
But it had, you know, they had the postmark on it, but no,
Yeah.
postage free.
Wasn't that the 3-cent stamp?
No, they were 1 cent.
Uh-huh.
Postcards were 1 cent.
Because I remember the 3-cent stamp, the postcard.
Yeah.
Oh, you're real young. No, I remember when postcards were a penny.
Yeah.
And I have some penny ones that,
Oh my goodness.
I don't think it ever went to 2 cents. I don't know if it ever went to 2 cents, but then it went to 3 cents.
Yeah.
But 3 cents was like a letter. That was to mail a letter.
Did you want to mention the 2 manufacturing plants in Comptche?
Oh, yeah. There are 2 manufacturing plants, one of which is closed now, but Wells Manufacturing, between our house and the post office, when we came to Comptche in '72, our first visitors were Alma and, what was old Mr. Wells's name?
Earl.
Earl. Alma and Earl Wells called on us. They had the Sunday school in Comptche. There was no church at the time. And so they invited us to come to services with them. And I guess Earl and Alma must have presided at the services.
I think Earl did.
We're Catholic though, so we would come in to St. Anthony's, but they were awfully kind to invite us to come. And that's been a very successful operation, Wells Manufacturing Company. Richard and Ginger Wells now run it with the help of their sons, and they do very well indeed. And the other manufacturing company was Mendocino Bottled Water. You may remember that product, which only died off just a few years ago. But if you would run up,
Docker.
is it Docker Hill Road?
No,
Or
Docker Hill.
Docker Hill Road, you'll see the old water plant there. And that was really quite a successful operation. Who were the owners? The Hills?
Hill.
Yeah. But it's a shame that that's not in business anymore.
What was the company that made the, it was kind of a secret thing, they made the crosshairs in the rifles?
That's probably Wells.
Was that Wells had that?
They had all kinds of different things.
But it was all hush-hush
Like
because it was during World War
Sid
II.
Newman worked there for years
Yeah,
and years
and
and
they
years.
made the crosshairs in the sights in the rifles.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Well, and I guess during the Second World War too, there was a tower at the Newman House, and people would take turns. I think Sid
That
Newman was one. They would take turns looking for Japanese airplanes. And
Well, they were all down the coast.
right,
Yeah.
right. Okay.
Spotters, yeah.
Uh-huh.
In recent years, a new industry has sprung up in Comptche, and that's vineyards. There were none for many, many years, as there had been none in Anderson Valley until the late 70s. But now the Chandelles make a very fine Pinot Noir. And I think it's selling for what, $40 a bottle. Now, the Chandelles wine, that's a Comptche wine.
In himself.
Right.
And who else now is putting in it?
Well, there are several other families that have small vineyards, but I don't think they are commercial as of yet.
Yeah.
So,
Are the Philbricks still in Comptche?
sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Jerry and,
And he
Yeah.
still has his
I worked with the
logging equipment.
Chet Chandelle, little boxcars, the lumber company.
yeah, Chet was really, I remember him too when he
Timber
was
and
Paul
stuff.
Bunyan
That's
that
right.
year.
That's right. Balled up my back, I think.
Bill, what were you-
Yeah, and the Chandelle, I don't know if she's a wife or a sister or a cousin, but one goes, I believe, she's with that Chandelle family to St. Anthony's. Is that the same one? Black hair?
I don't,
We don't know any Chandelles at St. Anthony's,
No.
but
we don't know, there are many Chandelles, but I don't know any.
It sounds like her name, and the word we got the other day is $50 a bottle.
oh,
You were
Really?
$10 low.
it could be
Oh, wow.
now. We haven't bought any since the price went up. No, it was, we tasted it the first year and it was well worth it. It was excellent wine.
Bill gave us a bottle one year, and it was fabulous, really good.
Yeah, it's very good stuff.
You know, vineyards kind of took over every place where they could plant a plant. I mean,
Our
never-
valley too.
Never
Right.
thought of that years ago, you know. Like Manice got that winery at Westport,
Pacific Star.
Pacific Star, yeah.
Your niece runs that? or-
Well, no, you're a second cousin to Sally.
Not the second cousin, yeah,
Yeah.
that's right.
We call her our
I
niece.
can't keep straight. Anyway, yeah.
Well, I think we're about out of material. If any of you, Bill?
It's interesting you mentioned this talent show or contest.
Yeah.
And you mentioned a lady who read or recited a ballad from Kipling.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, I noticed on the television law today, this afternoon, that Gunga Din was playing.
Oh, really?
Did she happen to recite Gunga Din?
You know, I don't know. I was so nervous about, I'll tell you what I was nervous about. Our daughter Nancy was very young at the time and not even old enough to go to the Comptche school. And we wanted everybody in the family to be in the band, so we gave Nancy a pair of cymbals. And the idea was that she would hold these cymbals while we played what we thought was Tin Roof Blues, and the audience, the tension would build. When is that little girl going to strike her cymbals? And then at the end of the song, on the very last note, she would strike the cymbals. That was what we rehearsed. And I said, Nancy, it's 72 bars of music and then you hit the cymbals. And she said, Daddy, you know I can't count to 72. So we worked out a deal where I'm a trombone player, and a trombone is a marvelous weapon for getting people's attention as you're standing behind them. So I said, Nancy, I will tap you on the shoulder with my trombone slide and at the moment that you're supposed to hit the cymbals. Well, having been nervous before the show, I got too excited during the performance, and on my cue, I hit her too hard, and she dropped her cymbals. And I think that's why we got the standing ovation. And then the kids said, well, we can do that on the Gong Show, too.
Did somebody tape this?
No, well, that was audio tape. No.
Oh.
Yeah. If you come over, we'll make you watch the tape of the Gong Show.
It was before videos.
Yeah, Bill?
I almost hate to ask you this question, and it's kind of a touchy one, but what's the condition of the roads as a result of all this rain? Is it pretty bad?
No, it's good today. They put in a barrier to try to restrain the rocks coming down that slide, and it's doing a pretty good job. Now, if we get a heavy rain again, I don't know what's going to happen. But one night I had a rehearsal. I play in the Symphony of the Redwoods, and I came back late night after rehearsal, and I almost didn't get through. And the next morning I had to return to Fort Bragg for another rehearsal, and rather than risk the road, I went around on 128. That makes it a pretty long trip. But right now it's okay. You can get through there. Katie Taya wrote a very nice letter to the editor of the Beacon to thank the road crews for all the work they've done keeping that road open, because it's a lifeline. Many people commute from Comptche to work, and if you want groceries, you got to be able to get through. Jeannie has said that you could actually live off the Comptche store, which is true, but if you want to do like a major shopping, then you pretty well have to go to Ukiah or Fort Bragg, and luckily that road has remained open the whole time.
Yeah, we really appreciate Dave Jacobson for keeping that store
Oh, we sure
open.
do. That store is a wonderful invention for Comptche. It was the Enixes. Did the Enix start it? The Enix family? Do you know?
I don't know.
No, it was Carl Peterson built it, and then George Tuso ran it for about 2 years, and then Bob and Edith bought it.
But then there was a store where the post office is now, the Ramirez's ran that, and Oaklanders before that.
Okay.
So actually, our post office, when I was a kid even, there was a store and a post office in there.
Huh.
Yeah.
Are any of the Escolas living in Comptche?
You'd have to ask Darlene or
No.
or
Emery died about, what, a year and a half ago, 2 years ago?
About 2 years ago,
Wasn't
yeah.
very long ago.
Yeah. And his daughter is down south, I think.
And then there was Arthur. And Arthur wrote a
I don't
book.
know what happened to him. What do you know?
I have the book.
Yeah.
There's Escolas in Fort Bragg and on the coast here, but none out in Comptche.
I just wondered.
Art, I wanted to tell you, Mamie Stump was my teacher
Oh,
when I went to grammar school.
yeah? Yeah, she was there for a long time, huh?
Yeah. Yeah.
Everybody didn't think Emil would ever marry, then she married
He married a school teacher.
a schoolworm. Boy, everybody got a big kick out of that. Yeah.
Where was the school when you were a student, Darlene?
The old school.
The old school in downtown Comptche?
Yeah.
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 Well, what do Polly and Grover live in? What school was that?
That was the Keene Summit School.
That was the Keene Summit School.
Yeah.
Okay, that's where the Stump children
Right, right.
went to school.
Because, you know, the mills or the tie camps were running it, so Keene Summit, there was Comptche, Icola Grade had a little schoolhouse. Escobels, there was a little schoolhouse, that's where the Piccolotti kids came up. So everybody, if you had 4 or more kids, you had a schoolhouse. Or a teacher with a bunch of kids, you had.
And then Charlie Smith's boys went to school there?
At the Keene
Skizix
Summit.
and Chester and, no,
Yeah, they would have gone to Keene
there were
Summit.
three boys. You remember Skizix?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Merle taught there too. Merle Smith taught at the Keene Summit School. And if they didn't have 5 children to have a school, people would take foster children to make up the difference.
To make up.
So that they could keep the school open.
Really darn.
Isn't that interesting?
My aunt taught in Keene Summit and had in her class Sandy Newman. That's the last of the Newman children. And then married Ben Stump, Rich's Art's uncle.
Oh, that was, yeah, Violet. Violet, yeah.
Right. Yeah, Bobby.
Yeah, Maggie, she ended up at the rest home over there
Oh,
in
really?
Ukiah. We used to visit her all the time. Boy, she was keen on names. She remembered, I mean, she hadn't seen me for a
Oh,
long.
Miriam,
Miriam, yeah.
yeah.
But she was there and I walked in and she looked at me and she knew me right off the thing, right up.
Well, yes, I hadn't seen her for 45 years, and she
Mary.
said, "Hello, Margaret."
Oh, my goodness.
And she was so thrilled about the helicopter ride over to Ukiah. But she wanted the helicopter to bring her home. It was
Mary did a
wonderful.
history talk here. She was one of our first ones, and it was fortunate that we had it at the time, because after that, she would not have been able to do it.
We remember the time she fell at night in her kitchen and broke her hip and lay on the floor all night. And then in the morning, we got a call from the housekeeper who had discovered Miriam lying on the floor. And of course, immediately we called the fire department. And our daughter Monica, who lives in the old Stump homestead, is also a registered nurse. So Monica showed up, the whole fire department showed up. And Miriam was most patient, just lying there on the floor.
Well, she,
Now, is that when they flew her to?
I think it
Yeah.
might
And
have
then they
been.
flew her to Ukiah, right?
But we said, well, why didn't you call somebody when you fell? And she said, well, I didn't want to bother anybody at that time.
Yeah, she's quite a lady.
She was wonderful.
Well, if there aren't any other questions or comments, we do have some coffee and hors d'oeuvres in here.
Sounds
So
good.
help yourself with that. We want to thank you very much for
Well, I sure appreciate it.
being here.
Yep.
Very enjoyable.
Well, we thank you for asking us.
Thank you.
And
Thank
thank
you very
you,
much.
Margaret and Art, for joining us.
Well, it was
And
a
you,
wonderful
Helen,
experience.
for
I
calling
wish I'd
people.
had more time to prepare things.